Hi, folks. We're having a little technical difficulty with the PowerPoint, but no reason we can't just get started. Um, I'm going to talk about some, considerations for creating a regional housing trust fund, sort of assuming that we want to do it. Oh, no, that's an old one. That's about a different topic. Here's what it looks like. So I'll assert that the local sources and systems that we've got so far are insufficient. Whether we're talking about 1.6 billion or 2 or 3 billion, we are going to need a place for those resources to go. And so a regional housing trust fund is a kind of mechanism that helps us sort of get beyond those administrative and legislative barriers that we're so fettered by in delivering these housing solutions. And if we think of those different sources as ingredients, then we can think about where do they go? How do we cook them up into being something more than just themselves? So, oh good, here it is. So I know it's just about lunchtime, so I'm getting you used to the idea right here. Housing trust funds are not a new idea. There are 700 of them that already exist in this country. There are about 50 in the state of California, and they're typically funded with a major 1 or 2 public sources. So if ours was funded by 4 or 5, that's just terrific. What matters is the dollar amount and how they get distributed in our thinking. So let's just think about maybe this would be a place for some of those fallow funds that exist in the local jurisdictions, maybe even here at MTC, the funds that already are used like HIP or the TPA incentive dollars, they could be put there. Those major sources, and then in some places, some resources, some of the Housing Trust Fund is held back to do investment, to grow the resources. And if there are loans being made, there's income from those interests. So you put that all in one place and sort of create a soup. There are examples of housing trust funds that do all of that. I wanted to point out one thing that would be a new ballgame for us, which is that there's no such thing as a trust fund that's the size that we're talking about. So we don't have a best practice. So once again, the Bay Area would have to be out there on that cutting edge. NPH and Enterprise brought together about a dozen experts and brought somebody who knows a lot about how these trust funds work around the country from the Center for Community Change about a couple months ago, and had a really hearty conversations and tackled these. What I wanted to talk about is how the resources would be deployed throughout the region to support all of the 3 Ps and ensure some equity is geographic, and then who would administer the funds. So this is just a sketch, a Sunday morning, early morning on a plane sketch that we could right size proportionally later. But let's think about making sure that the trust fund would serve the whole region by having some of those resources returned to source and some of them shared across the region. Now, what Ken presented was that 10% of them would return to source. We can debate that sort of proportionality later. And some of the resources would be needed for operations. Now, if you start to layer in conceptually that some resources would be used for protections.
Heather, can you define return to source in case people don't understand what that means?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The Mountain View linkage fees get into the Regional Housing Trust Fund, and some of them are insured to go back to uses in Mountain View, and some of them are shared across the region, and so on, throughout our jurisdictions. So layer into this concept that also there would be these proportions that Ken started to talk about. These are just in quarters for protections, preservation, and production. I'd argue that we'd also need something like innovations. 2 years ago, we didn't know scooters were going to take over our city streets, right? So we don't know what the housing innovations are going to be in the future, and we're going to need that flexibility. So that gets built in as well. So it remains to be answered by an attorney we need to do a lot more digging to understand what the best place is to situate such a fund. It could be in a joint powers authority, such as the Bay Area Toll Authority. It could be an account simply here at MTC and governed with MTC and ABAG once they're fully merged. It could be with the CDFI and so on. You know, I just was in Seattle asking them how they're doing it this past Monday, because they're going to do something very similar. And they're giving themselves 2 years and $250,000 to have those hearty conversations to figure this stuff out. So the next steps would be to start to do that and figure out, you know, that situation question, the governance question, the right sizing of everything. But not to be deterred. This has been done before, just not quite as bold as we need to be.